The bus rattled over the worn asphalt, the early morning sun glinting off the windows, casting sharp lines of light across the seats. For most of the kids on board, it was just another ride to school, filled with chatter and laughter. But for Emily, every bus ride was a test she wasn't sure she could pass. She sat near the middle, clutching her backpack to her chest, her small frame hunched over, trying to make herself invisible. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, tracing cracks in the worn linoleum, hoping, just hoping, that today might be different, that the whispers and shoves wouldn't find her. She had always been quiet, the kind of girl who melted into the background, who said little and observed everything. Most people didn't notice her unless they wanted to make fun. And bullies always seemed to know exactly where to look. The whispers started faintly at first, almost a hiss that could be mistaken for nothing, but Emily recognized it immediately. She felt the weight of their gaze before she even looked up. 3 boys in the back of the bus were watching her, smirking, nudging each other, clearly amused by something only they understood. Emily stiffened. Her heart pounded against her ribs, and her fingers dug into her bag's straps. She had learned to stay silent, to stay small, to wait for the torment to pass. Usually, it did, but sometimes, it didn't. Today, it didn't. Hey, freak, one of the boys hissed, leaning slightly forward. Why don't you ever talk? Cat got your tongue. Emily's stomach knotted. She looked down at her shoes, willing the world to swallow her whole. She didn't respond, not because she didn't have words, but because she knew nothing she said would matter. She had learned that the hard way. The second boy snickered, reaching toward her with a cruel grin, fingers brushing against her hair. What's wrong? Mute. Say something. Say anything. She flinched but stayed silent. Her eyes welled up, but she refused to cry. Tears were a privilege she couldn't afford in front of them. And then the third boy, the tallest and meanest of the 3, swaggered down the aisle. He grabbed Emily by the back of the neck, squeezing hard enough to make her gasp, her small frame jerking under the force. Her hands went up instinctively, trying to push him away, but he was bigger, stronger, and cruel in a way she had never been able to defend herself against. Her eyes widened in fear, panic coursing through her body, and still, she stayed silent. She didn't have to stay silent for long. A presence in the back of the bus shifted. A man stood quietly, unassuming at first, wearing a baseball cap low over his face. To anyone else, he might have looked like an ordinary parent catching a ride. But he was far from ordinary. Broad-shouldered, calm, and disciplined, he had a presence that could silence a room. And he wasn't just a dad. He was a SWAT officer, trained to notice danger before it happened, to read situations in a single glance, to react in a way that protected the innocent. And the innocent girl he cared about most in the world was Emily. The bus seemed to pause for a moment, almost imperceptibly, as if sensing the shift in energy. The boy still held Emily's neck, laughing nervously now, unaware that the calm figure behind him had already assessed everything, the risk, the danger, the consequences. Let go of her, the man said, his voice cutting through the murmur of the bus like a whip. The laughter died instantly. The boy froze, his hand still on Emily's neck, his eyes flicking back to the man behind him. Fear replaced the smirk. The quiet, measured authority in the voice was something he had never heard before, something that didn't just sound like anger, it sounded like consequences waiting to happen. Emily's father stepped forward slowly, deliberately, keeping his voice calm but heavy with warning. Do you think it's funny? To put your hands on someone smaller than you? To scare a girl who hasn't done anything to you? His gaze swept across the boys, sharp and unyielding. Try that again. On me. The boy jerked his hand back as though it had been burned. The other 2 shuffled uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. The bravado they had relied on evaporated instantly. Emily's father crouched slightly beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Are you okay, sweetheart? He asked gently. She nodded quickly, swallowing hard. She couldn't speak. Words were trapped in her throat. But the trembling in her hands eased slightly under his steady grip. Then he turned back to the boys, his voice dropping a notch, quiet but lethal in its authority. You boys are lucky. You don't know what it's like to feel powerless. You don't know what it's like to be scared for no reason. But you just gave her a taste of that fear, for your amusement. I want you to think about that. Really think about it. Maybe you'll understand one day that cruelty doesn't make you strong. It just makes you weak. The boys sank further into their seats, each staring at the floor, cheeks flushed, caught in a mix of fear and shame. The bus had gone silent. Even the driver, who had been distracted, seemed to realize something serious was happening. Emily leaned against her father, letting herself relax for the first time in what felt like forever. She had spent years feeling invisible, small, and unworthy, but in that moment, she felt safe. Truly safe. She felt seen. And for a quiet girl who had never asked for attention, it was a revelation. When the bus finally pulled up to the school, Emily hesitated. Usually, she would wait until everyone else had gone, avoiding any eyes, any potential ridicule. But today was different. Today, she walked down the aisle with her father at her side, hands steady on her back, his presence giving her strength she didn't know she had. No one dared to whisper. No one dared to snicker. Once they were off the bus and on the sidewalk, Emily finally let herself breathe. Her father crouched down to her level, looking her in the eyes. "You know," he said softly, "you are never alone. No matter what. Not on a bus. Not at school. Not anywhere. You are not invisible. You are not weak. You are strong, and you deserve to be treated that way." Emily blinked back tears, trying to hold them in, but a sob escaped. She wrapped her arms around him, holding on as tightly as she could. For the first time, she didn't feel like the quiet, powerless girl. She felt protected. She felt loved. She felt worthy. Weeks passed, and the memory of that day remained with Emily. The bullies never touched her again. One of them even mumbled an awkward apology weeks later, embarrassed by the memory of being confronted. It wasn't a grand victory, but it was a start. Emily's life slowly began to change. She started speaking up more, first in small ways, answering questions in class, sharing her thoughts with friends, and then in larger ways, standing up for herself and even for others who seemed lost in the background like she once had. She discovered a quiet courage she hadn't known existed. Her father watched this transformation quietly, proud but never boastful. He didn't need to. Emily's confidence was her own. What he had done that day on the bus was simply a reminder that she wasn't alone and that someone would always stand up for her if she couldn't stand up for herself yet. And that knowledge, more than anything, gave her the courage to begin standing on her own. One evening, Emily asked him again, softly, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "Dad, why didn't you just yell at them more? Or punish them?" He looked at her, the sunset casting warm light on his face, and said, "Because anger doesn't teach lessons. Punishment doesn't always help people understand. I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions, to understand how it feels to hurt someone weaker. And more importantly, I wanted you to see that you are never alone, that someone has your back, and that your voice matters. That's the lesson I wanted you to carry with you." Emily hugged him tightly, letting the warmth and reassurance wash over her. She felt an unspoken promise in that embrace, one that said, no matter what challenges lay ahead, she could face them, because she was never truly alone. School became different after that. Emily still kept her quiet, observant nature, but she walked a little taller, spoke a little louder, and smiled more freely. The bullies still existed in the halls, but their attempts to intimidate her were met with quiet confidence. She didn't need to fight them physically or yell. Her presence alone, fortified by that day on the bus, told the world she was not someone to be trifled with. Emily's story spread quietly among the students. Not in the form of gossip or boasting, but as a subtle lesson, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, courage is knowing someone has your back and trusting yourself to stand tall when it matters most. The bus rides continued, as they always do, but Emily no longer dreaded them. She learned to look out the window, to trace the shadows of the trees, to feel the motion beneath her feet. She learned that she had a voice, even if she chose to use it sparingly. And she learned that strength doesn't always come from fighting back, it comes from believing in yourself and knowing that others believe in you too. Sometimes, Emily would catch a glimpse of her father's eyes across the room, or hear the steady sound of his voice in her memory, and she would smile. That quiet strength, that unshakable presence, had changed her life forever. It wasn't just a single moment of protection on a bus, it was a lifelong lesson about love, courage, and the quiet power of standing up for what's right. And for Emily, the quiet girl who once felt invisible, it became clear, she was never truly invisible. She was always seen, always cared for, and always capable of standing strong.